What can we learn about a mature prayer life from this week's parasha, Toldot? Story of Isaac and Rebekah unfolds, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah for his wife. ויהי יצחק בן 40 שנה לקחתו את רבקה בת בתואל הארמי מפדן ארם. So Isaac and Rebekah were married, and we know of both of them, both of these wonderful ancestors that are founders of the Jewish people, of the second generation of the Jewish family, that they had unique relationships with God, each of them on their own, and they're both shown as praying within chapter 25 of Genesis, so that both men and women are shown as essentially in relationship with God as they are in relationship with each other. And that is an important statement in and of itself in terms of the Torah's projecting upon human beings any of the qualities of the ancestors as they were represented in our Torah. That both men and women have rich and personal relationships with Kodesh Baruch Hu, with God, and the action of prayer increases one's capacity, gives one a sense of meaning and power, potentially control, or allows us to relinquish our power and control over the unfolding events of our lives and history. And sometimes pray for acceptance, or at least think through how we might accept that which is unfolding around us or happening to us. This kind of maturity in our prayer lives, in order to be able to approach God and both to use liturgies and our own language to formulate the requests, the praises, the questions we have, are demonstrated in different verses of our parsha. The first verse that explains prayer, or how we might engage it, and these are only a few examples of how it works, but we'll take those from this week's parsha, is verse 21 of chapter 25 of Genesis. Vayetar Yitzchak l'Adonai l'nochach ishto ki akarahi. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. Seeing the struggles and knowing of the suffering and recognizing the situation, both in terms of his wife's struggles and her inner feelings and his sense that the future was not going the way he planned. The destiny that seemed in his hands was not necessarily his to define. He turned to God, and the Torah uses the verb vayetar. And this verb is both used in terms of prayer and then quite oppositely used when God grants prayer, answers prayer. And we know that sometimes our prayers are answered affirmatively. Of course, we know that sometimes our prayers are not answered in the affirmative. And we have to pray for the ability to sustain ourselves when we desire or want or seek to pursue ends that are just not happening in the way that our lives or history or our world is unfolding. And so when we seek God and pray for what we want or what others want, in this case, Isaac was praying for his wife who was barren to have a child, we of course know we have to use that time to truly make the ask, and to also equally and oppositely ask for the strength to survive through the reality that it might not go our way. Sometimes though it does. And we're not asking for a magical response to say that our prayers are the beginnings of moving God exactly like we would like God to move. But we are hoping that there are possibilities that might be unlocked if we add prayer to the various ways that we pursue our goals and hope for our futures to unfold. What happens in the Torah is that Rivka does conceive. And maybe what we can learn about Isaac in terms of his prayer life there is that when he, as Rashi explains, hirba v'hiftzir b'tfilah, when he prayed very much, he added to his prayers and he entreated God with prayer. That perhaps what he was doing is he was spilling out what was very specifically his own hopes as they related particularly to his and Rivka's lives. And what I believe that creates is the possibility of prayer in our lives that goes beyond a recitation of liturgy or a singing of the songs or a response, kadosh, 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 when we're in the middle of the recitation, the public recitation of the Amidah. What I think the Torah is explaining is that, going back to the roots of our ancestors' prayers, that we should come to God, come to Jewish prayer, engage in Jewish prayer life, beseeching God, entreating God, explaining it in language that is all our own. And that's not so easy for Jewish people, to create asks and to express desires and to share their hopes with God in their own language. But part of prayer, maybe in between the liturgy as we know it, maybe at other times, in other places, beyond going to synagogue on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, that is the example of Isaac. Remember that he was the one who was lasuach basadeh. Isaac went out to have a conversation with God in the middle of a field, and that's where Rivka first encountered him in a meditative practice. Meditation in Judaism may not be mind erasure as much as it is mindfulness, and not only breath awareness, but a creation of words, a sense of asking, telling, beseeching, entreating, talking with God, having a conversation. And yes, you could define that as being deep conversation with oneself, but this notion that we have self-conversation and talk with ourselves more than anyone else probably in the world, we talk with ourselves. That's not enough. The Torah suggests we need a conversation, a dialogue with God. We need God to hear us, even if we don't get direct communication back. That is the opening to understanding God's responses in our lives, whether we get exactly what we want or we don't get it exactly the way we think we ought to. And so that was Isaac's verse. The verse right after that, verse 22, highlights Rebecca's going to God. And instead of her prayer being about what she and Isaac hoped for in the future, she is an example of taking her prayers to God while she's experiencing the pregnancy she's so blessed with and the suffering she's experiencing in that pregnancy, the kicking within her womb of these twins to be born soon. And we know that sometimes during pregnant times in our lives, that though there is great possibility in that pregnant space and time in our lives, we go through some suffering, we go through changes, we have to recognize that there are hurdles to overcome, there are transformations going on with which we could definitely grapple ourselves, but we have partners to do it with, and we have God to bring into that experience. And so Rivka, in verse 22 of chapter 25, experiences struggling within her. Vayidrotzetzu habanim b'kirba, This is physical suffering because of the pregnancy, but also metaphorically, whenever we have this kind of turmoil within our souls, we can see Rivka as an example for how we might deal with that. But Tomer im Cain, and she says, Lama ze anochi? Why me? Giving us a sense that for millennia, people have asked that same question. Why me? Why this? Why now? And what do you do with that feeling? You go, vatelech lidrosh et Adonai. That part and parcel to the Jewish experience, the lech verb is used, part and parcel to the Jewish journey, is the unfolding of life on earth, the way it could be, the way it ought to be, the way it should be, the way we want it to be, and all the endeavors we'll have to do with our physical bodies, our minds, our hands, our hearts, and our souls. And then we need to add that element of prayer life. And we need to go lidrosh et Adonai. We need to go inquire of God. If we want to, we can thrust the question, why me? If we would like, we can formulate other questions. And again, those questions need not be in the forms of poetry and liturgy and the service as we know it on the pages of our prayer books. They are written on our hearts. They are written in the mindful, soulful, rational or irrational moments of emotion that we have when we go and we lech v'telech, when we holech or holechet, when we go and bring our prayer before God to do exactly what Rebecca did in verse 22, lidrosh et Adonai. She goes and inquires of God. And what is it to lidrosh et Adonai? Interestingly, Rashi has to expand on that phrase and suggest that she went to the Beit Midrash of Shem, Leveit Midrasho Shel Shem. She went to the Beit Midrash of one of the children of Noah, one of the families of the earth, the Shemites. Fascinating response from Rashi in that vein, that when she goes to inquire of the Lord, what she senses is that there are answers in the acquired wisdom of humanity and in sacred sources that would be in a Beit Midrash. Here is both a universal and a particular kind of response, that prayer leads to study, that prayer leads to the acquisition of wisdom. And if our prayers, and if during our prayers, during services, one of our motivations would be to use Rivka's example as what the outcome of prayer might hold for us, we would be, I think, better off and on good journeys for our lives. And what is that journey we're to be on, using Rebecca's example? To clarify what wisdom we need to seek, whether it be from the great storehouse of wisdom of humanity or the sacred texts of the Jewish tradition. What wisdom do we need in order to be able to handle the struggles, the suffering, the situations, the hopes we have for our lives? And if we were to clarify which journeys we would need to be on in order to seek the wisdom we need, that is an expression of godliness in our lives. You know, when we share experiences with one another, and those are shorter conversations, or we take time and really say, you know what, I ought to sit down and talk this through with someone who I can trust, to create a chevruta, to create an inquiry in a Beit Midrash kind of format, in the way Jews study at the study house, to sit down one-on-one, to pour over a little text, to look at a part of Torah, to seek from the Talmud any wisdom that we've got, whether it be about some kind of theoretical issue or issue in society, or apply it to a struggle we have within our lives, with a situation that we've encountered within our marriage, within a friendship, within a relationship we have. We really do make use of the expansive sense of prayer life that the Torah really invites us to have through explaining that Isaac and Rebekah turned towards God, prayed, inquired, and became spiritually anchored in a relationship with the creator of the universe, the Mekayim Am Yisrael, the one who established the Jewish people. May you have sweet prayers. May you have a chance to crystallize your questions. May you have engaging times with our liturgy as it stands, the poetry of our people in our prayer book, and may you find a way to express the prayers of your heart. Ask God the questions on your mind at times that both seem like those natural ones we pray as Jews and ones you make for yourself. Strength to strength, may we go from strength to strength. Shabbat Shalom.